Files in corruption, abuse of power by America's progressive elite. Peter, thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Bret.
Congrats on the book.
Thank you.
I've read through it. You devote a good portion of this book, 70 pages or so, to Joe Biden and his family.
Yeah.
And what do you say to people? Isn't this pretty well exhausted, considering that at least some of the family is part of this impeachment trial that's ongoing currently?
Yeah, I think it's a question of scope and size. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, looking at corruption, Republicans and Democrats. I've never really seen a family with 5 members involved this extensively. So I think it's important for people to understand that and know that.
We're looking at Hunter Biden there, and people follow that with Burisma and other financial dealings, but you're talking about other members of the family.
That's right. We're talking about his daughter, Ashley, whose husband had a business that was effectively launched in the Oval Office. Joe Biden gave private briefings to investors and partners in this company, while his son-in-law was one of the principals involved. We're talking about 2 of his brothers that had deals, one involving federal contracts in the United States for a construction company. He had no background in construction. Another brother doing deals overseas. So it's a systematic pattern of corruption that I think people need to be aware of.
So when the Biden people or any supporters hear this, they say there is no specific wrongdoing by Joe Biden. What do you say to that?
Well, I think it may not be illegal, but I think it's certainly corrupt. And the point is that Joe Biden granted access and by the very nature of his power created opportunities. I mean, if you look at the Hunter Biden case in particular, the timing here is key. Hunter Biden could have been hired by the Ukrainians anytime, but he was hired in the spring of 2014 as point person on Ukraine. Within 2 or 3 weeks, Hunter Biden has suddenly been identified by the Ukrainians and is put on a payroll to the tune of about $1 million a year. That timing is significant, and Joe Biden really could have said, as politicians do in Washington, D.C., to his family, look, I don't want you doing these kind of deals. But he's obviously never said that because they still have access and the deals are still taking place.
Kate Bedingfield with the Biden campaign, as you wrote this op-ed to the New York Times, came out and said that it was, in her words, malicious claims about the Biden family. The pushback is that the Bidens, the relatives, are hardly the first people to use kind of a famous name to bolster their livelihoods, I guess. And while it's swampy, what do you take away from it? And is it a problem right now for Joe Biden, the candidate?
It's a great question. I think it's one of those things that's kind of become acceptable in Washington, D.C., but outside the Beltway, people are still very frustrated and angered about it. And I don't think this is just a case of having a name that's kind of helping you. Everybody knows if your last name is, say, Bush or Biden, you're going to have certain inherent advantages. What we're talking about here is families, political families that are making money once they achieve political power. That's the key difference. If you achieve political power and then your family becomes wealthy because of your public service, I think people, at least out of Washington, D.C., are still outraged by that and should be.
I've read your stuff for years, and I noticed you go down into the weeds, you get the actual documents. I mean, It's not like made-up stuff or a supposition. But some of your critics have said that your investigations really are kind of opposition research.
Right.
So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's certainly not opposition research. I mean, we focus on one thing: follow the money. So this is not about, personal problems or substance abuse. It's about follow the money. But I also, if you look at my track record, I've gone after Republicans and Democrats. The reason I focused on this book, I talk about it in chapter 1, on these progressives is I think we have in American media today what I call the Trump vortex. It kind of sucks in everything, and there's been massive scandals or perceived as scandals. That's a good thing. But the problem is some of the reporting's good, some of the reporting's bad, but it kind of blacks out everything. And my point is Trump needs to be scrutinized, but so do those people that are aspiring to his office or have other positions of responsibility.
Last thing, there are 8 politicians in here. They're all Democrats, obviously. And you spent a lot of time on the Bidens. You think that's the most egregious of the things you found?
I think it's hard to say. It's certainly the most systematic because Joe Biden's been there the longest. But I think there's a lot of things about Elizabeth Warren that are troubling, about how she was actually a government consultant in the 1990s, rewriting bankruptcy laws. And in a typical Washington move, she took that position and cashed in. She basically went to corporations and said, I will consult for you and advise you in how to use the law that I wrote to your maximum advantage. And there are others.
It's an interesting read. The book is Profiles in Corruption. Peter Schweizer, thanks for the time.
Thanks, Bret.